In this video, I'm going to show you how I made these fun, colorful mirrors using beer and soda cans and some scrap cardboard. So the first thing you're going to need is your mirror, and I'm just working with some small 5x5 square mirrors. And I want to protect the mirror while I'm working with it, so I'm just going to cover it with some painter's tape. And I want my edges to be clean so that this will fit in my frame. So I'm just going to trim my excess tape off here. And if you have mirrors that have these little rubber feet on there, you're going to want to get them off. So I'm just carefully sort of peeling them off with a knife. You could probably use a scraper, whatever, whoops, whatever you need to. Be careful that you don't damage the back of the mirror, but just gently remove the little foam feet, because you don't want your mirror to be that thick. So I'm going to be using 2 layers of thickness of cardboard. So I need 1 layer for the frame and 1 layer for the backing. Now, a little bit later in the video, I'm going to show you why you might want to actually use 2 or 3 layers of backing just to make your piece a little bit thicker. And it has to do with the way that we're finishing the edges. But I'm just going to be using 2 layers. And I need 1 layer that's nice and smooth and clean for the back piece. And then you can use the folded edges and the less pristine pieces for your framed out piece. So I'm just going to lay my mirror piece on here and trace around it. And I've decided to make my frames 2.5 inches wide around my mirror. You can certainly design your frames larger or smaller, whatever you prefer. So I'm just going to take my ruler, make sure I get everything square, and I'm going to draw another rectangle 2.5 inches outside of my frame here. And then I can go ahead and cut out my shape. You can use scissors, you can use a box knife or an X-Acto knife. I'm going to get my cutting mat out and use my X-Acto knife to cut out this shape. You want to be a little more careful when you're cutting this inside piece. It's not terrible. It's not the end of the world if you cut it too far, but you want to avoid over-cutting the inside edge here if you can. So once you have your frame piece cut out, you want to make sure that your mirror will fit pretty snugly inside of that shape. If it's a little bit too big, it's not the end of the world, but you definitely don't want to leave large gaps around the edge of your mirror. So ideally, it'll fit in there and kind of hold and stay in the shape. For the back piece, or if you decide to cut multiple back pieces, whatever you have on the outside edge will need to be the smooth piece. And if you use extra cardboard for the back, you can use some of your less pristine pieces if you sandwich them in between. So I'm just going to be using 1 piece, like I said, and you can go ahead and measure yours out if you want to. I am kind of lazy and I just prefer to do the tracing method, so I'm just going to trace around my frame piece and then cut out my back piece. So once I have my back piece cut, I want to take some Mod Podge, or probably any PVA glue will work. I know for sure that the Mod Podge works. And I'm just going to put kind of a thick coat on one side here. Doesn't have to be super thick, but you don't want to be too skimpy. And then I'm going to let this dry. So you can see that my Mod Podge is dry on my cardboard now, and what I've done is I've cut a piece of fabric that's a little bit bigger than my square here. Because what I want to do is I want this to cover the back of my mirror, and then I need the piece to wrap around the edges. But you want to make sure that your piece is thick enough to wrap around all of your layers and still kind of come over the top. So if you're using extra back layer pieces, you're going to want to cut your fabric just a little bit larger so that it will fit all the way around and just come up around the edge a 1/4 inch or so. So I want to apply the fabric to my cardboard, and I want it to remain nice and smooth. And to do that, I've got my iron heating up on a medium heat setting. And I'm just going to use a piece of parchment paper on top here to protect my iron, just because I am using glue. It shouldn't come through the fabric, but just in case it does, it's a good precaution to have a piece of parchment paper in between your fabric and your iron. So I want to center my fabric on my piece of cardboard so that I have a nice edge all the way around. And then I'm just going to use my iron to add some heat. Now you could just use the Mod Podge wet and lay your fabric in there, but sometimes that bleeds through and you don't end up with a clean back. You might end up with some spots and where the glue was kind of wet and soaked through the fabric. So as you're ironing, your cardboard might curl up just a little bit. And you don't have to have the fabric stuck super tight, because that's not really what's going to hold the fabric on, but you do want it to just be a nice smooth back. So you can see maybe that my cardboard's curved just a little bit, so I'm just going to hit it with the iron from the back side just to flatten it out. So once you have your fabric attached to your back piece of cardboard, you're going to want to use some glue. I have some hot glue heating up, and you're going to glue your cardboard layers together. So if you're using extra backing pieces to make your back a little bit thicker, you can go ahead and glue those pieces on with your hot glue or E6000 glue, whatever glue you want to use. I'm going to use the hot glue just because it's a lot faster. And once you have your back pieces together, you can go ahead and glue on your frame piece. You don't need to use a ton of glue because there's not going to be a lot of pressure on this to pull apart or anything. You just want to hold it secure so that you can work with it. And in some cases, when you have folds on your piece, it's actually easier to glue down. And the next thing I want to do is I want to secure my edges around my cardboard. Now you can use glue again, you could use probably any kind of tape. I'm going to actually use my metal tape because it's just really easy to work with. It's very tacky and it has a paper backing on it, so it's not going to stick to something I don't want it to stick to. So I'm just going to cut some pieces that are long enough to go along my edge here, and I don't need this whole width. Again, you can secure your edges any way you want to. You just want to make sure that you have the fabric pulled tightly and that you have kind of a smooth edge on the edge of your cardboard. And I just think that this metal tape is one of the easiest ways to do that, because you'll see here in a minute that you can just peel back a little bit of the tape leave the paper on the rest of it and add the tape to the edge of your fabric. And then when you're ready, you can pull the whole thing kind of snugly and evenly, and you don't have to wait for any glue to dry. And it just has you should have a nice smooth edge of fabric. Now I'm going to do the opposite edge just because I like to kind of fold a little corner like you're wrapping a package. So I'm going to add my other piece of tape. And then I'll do the other two sides. So here's what I mean about the corners. I just kind of have them folded like a package, and then I'm just going to wrap the edge up and tape it. And then I'll do that to my other side as well. So I want to make a little hanger hook for the back of my mirror here, and to do that I'm going to use a couple of pull tabs from the beer and soda cans, and I have a pair of pliers here, and I just want to crimp a tiny bit of a bend in this so it isn't totally flat. So I'm going to grab the pull tab with my pliers and just bend it ever so slightly. Right at the bottom of the sort of smaller oval of my pull tab. So I just have a tiny bend in there. And I'm going to do that on a second pull tab. So depending on your size and shape of your mirrors, your measurements might be slightly different. But I'm going to place my pull tabs down 2 inches and in 2 inches from the side. So I'm going to work on the back of my piece, and I'm just going to come down 2 inches and in 2 inches from the side, and I'm going to mark my holes with a little stylus here. And to attach my pull tabs, I've got a couple of little brad or paper fasteners here. And they should, once you have a little hole made, they should kind of just make their own hole. They're a little bit sharp, and you should be able to punch a hole all the way through. So once you've got your hole all the way through, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to thread my pull tab onto the paper fastener and slide that through the hole. And then I'll just repeat that process for my other hole. I think it's a little easier to make the hole with the paper fastener without the pull tab on there, but you can decide which way you prefer to do it. This step is optional, but I like to trim off a little bit of my excess metal here just to keep it out of the way. Depending on your design, you may not need to, but I'm just going to trim off. I have a pair of tin snips, and I'm just going to trim off a little bit of my fastener tabs so that I don't have quite such a big strip of metal to work around. And then once that's done, I can go ahead and secure my fasteners. And now I'm just going to tie on some cording to make the hanger for the back of my mirror. So what I want to do now is secure my mirror into my frame, and my go-to glue is always E6000 glue. If your mirror is fitting a little more loosely in your frame, you can add a little bit of hot glue just for a quicker grab, but I would definitely recommend using E6000 glue for this step. So you can probably come up with some different designs for your frames, but I'm just going to use this simple rectangular shape and square shape to make my mirror frames. So for this step, you need your flattened aluminum sheets. And if you're not familiar with working with aluminum cans, I have a free mini course that I will link to in the description box. And it covers a lot of just very basic topics, including how I break down my cans and flatten them into aluminum sheets. So you're going to need enough material to cover your frame, and you can do it in single colors, multiple colors. You can use whatever appeals to you aesthetically. So I'm just going to be using these two can styles for my design. I've also cut my two template pieces out of some heavyweight junk mail, and I've put a little piece of double-sided tape on them so that I can just stick them to the cans and cut out my shapes with a regular pair of scissors. So I'm just going to use my templates and cut out the pieces and kind of fill them in around my frame until I have all the pieces cut. And you can play around with the direction of the pieces and what part of the can that you're using. Again, it's just kind of whatever appeals to you aesthetically. So once you have a layout that you like, you can take some hot glue and glue your pieces in place onto the cardboard frame. Now I like to also add an additional step to smooth out my hot glue and make sure that it's a flatter surface. So I also heat up my iron, and once I have the pieces in place, I use my parchment paper again to cover the piece and just heat up all of the glue, and that way I can also adjust the pieces if I haven't gotten them exactly straight. And it's just an extra step that I like to do to smooth out the hot glue. You don't have to worry if your edges are secured down. You just want to make sure that your pieces are laying flat and that they're in the position that you want them. In this next step, I'm going to be finishing off the edges of my aluminum to complete my project. And I'm going to do that by using some thumbtacks. Now, because I've only used 2 layers of cardboard, I'm going to have to cut down the bail or the point of my thumbtacks, because otherwise they will punch all the way through the material and stick out the back. So this is the step where you may want to be sure that you've added extra layers of cardboard so that your thumbtacks don't poke through on the back of your material. If they do, you can fix this problem by using a pair of nail pulling pliers and just cutting off part of your thumbtack. And that's what I've done for all of mine, because I did use only 2 layers of cardboard. So I'm going to be using the thumbtacks to fill in around all of the edges of my metal pieces. And I want to make sure that I keep everything in a very nice straight line. You can probably see right here where the metal is not the same. This piece is a little bigger than this piece. And so I'm going to use a Sharpie marker just to draw some lines so that I can make sure that I'm keeping my thumbtacks in a straight line. So I want to draw just a maybe 1/16 of an inch from the edge all the way around. And if you're on the fabric or part of your metal, it doesn't matter. You want to just make sure that you're keeping a nice straight line to follow when you're applying the thumbtacks. And I want to make sure that I'm not so far away from the edge that the thumbtack won't cover the edge. So however thick of a pen you're using, you might want to adjust your measurements slightly. And once I have my outside edge drawn, I'm going to go ahead and draw my inside lines around the mirror. So it's a little harder to see on the darker colors, but you have a nice straight line to follow when you're making your holes and punching your thumbtacks. So I've got my thumbtacks cut down here so that they won't stick through my 2 layers of cardboard. And I've also got a stylist tool here. This I got at the Dollar Tree, so they're very affordable. And I think it's a little bit sharper than the thumbtacks, even if you don't cut your tips off. So even if you're using the full thumbtack, you may still want to use the stylus for your project. And I'm definitely going to need it because I've cut the tips off of my thumbtacks. So I'm just going to start by punching a hole in the corner of my inside rectangle, because I want my corners and everything to line up. And you may want to pull back the painter's tape on your mirror just a little bit, because we're going to also be using some E6000 glue, and you don't want to get any glue on the tape. You don't want to glue the tape down. So I've punched my corner hole here, and then I'm going to take my E6000 glue and just add a little bit to my thumbtack because I don't want it to pull out, and I'm going to punch it into the hole that I made. Now you want to make sure that you're just covering your line, you're covering both of the edges of metal, and that you're coming up just above your mirror, so you're covering your mirror just a little bit. And then you're just going to continue filling in all of your lines, keeping your thumbtacks as straight as possible. And sometimes you may find that the metal shaft of your thumbtack isn't exactly in the center, so there's not a completely precise way to do this. You may end up overlapping your thumbtacks a little bit, or you may end up with slight gaps between your thumbtacks. If you do, you can adjust where the hole is, because the thumbtack itself will cover most of the flaws if you make an additional hole, and the glue will hold the thumbtack in place. So you may have a little bit of shifting around. Once you've punched a hole, you may want to adjust where you put it, and that's just fine. You just want to make sure that you're keeping your lines as straight as possible, and that you like the way everything is looking as you're working with it. So I'm going to continue filling in all of my thumbtacks, and once that's done, I will have a completed mirror.